He just wanted to understand why she always left so early, but what he discovered changed his life forever. Every day, at 6:30 a.m., the same ritual. The coffee maker in the mansion's kitchen hadn't even fully warmed up, and Grace had already mopped the floor, collected the trash, washed the dishes from last night's dinner, all in silence. No sound except her light footsteps and the gentle jingling of keys in her apron pocket. She was invisible, and perhaps for many, that was a choice. But not for Nathan Reid. Nathan was one of the youngest entrepreneurs to make Forbes' 30 Under 30 list. Owner of a tech company in Los Angeles, he accumulated millions with an app that taught productivity. However, ironically, he himself barely had time to observe who worked around him until that day. It all started with something almost insignificant. He forgot his headphones in the mansion's kitchen and went downstairs earlier than usual. He saw Grace quickly closing her backpack, adjusting her coat, and hurrying out the back door. It was still dark outside. "She's leaving already? It's not even 7 a.m. yet," he thought. It was strange. She had been hired for shifts until 10 a.m. From then on, something began to bother him. First, the number of times Grace refused raises. Then, the "no-need, sir" responses whenever they offered help with transportation or packed meals. She never asked for days off, never called in sick. It was as if she didn't have the right to stop. Nathan was a man of logic. He had grown up surrounded by data, spreadsheets, and forecasts, but there was something he couldn't put in graphs, the feeling that there was hidden pain there, a story that no one knew, and that perhaps she herself wanted to hide. In a world where everyone screams to be seen, Grace seemed to beg to go unnoticed. But why? And then, on a seemingly ordinary Wednesday, he did something he never imagined he would do. He waited for her to leave, discreetly took his car, and began to follow her. What he saw on the streets of Los Angeles that morning, and in the hours that followed, would tear down everything he believed about meritocracy, kindness, and the true meaning of wealth. Sometimes eyes only open when the heart is willing to see. And that day, Nathan's heart was pierced. Grace woke up every day at 4:45 a.m. The alarm was an old gospel song that played softly on her cracked cell phone. Not because she needed music, but because that melody reminded her that there was still something good in the world, even if she saw little of it. The first thing she did was check if the small heater in the room was still working. It was winter in Los Angeles, and the house where she lived, an old trailer parked in a marginal area of Boyle Heights, could barely hold back the wind. Next, she looked at the makeshift mattress beside her. There slept her son, Evan, 7 years old. Skinny, pale face, covered by 2 thin blankets. He had chronic asthma, and that's why Grace raced against time every day. There was no luxury, no hot water, just a plastic bucket where she washed her face before leaving. In less than 10 minutes, she was already dressed in her grey uniform, hair pulled back in an improvised bun, and backpack with a sandwich, a spare inhaler, and a water bottle for her son. At 5:30 a.m., she left Evan with her neighbor, Donna Teresa, a retired Mexican lady who, despite her difficulties, insisted on helping her with the boy. "Go with God, mija," she would say, with eyes swollen from sleep. Grace would just smile, murmur a "thank you," and walk quickly to the bus station. At Nathan's mansion in Brentwood, she always arrived before sunrise. She was the first to arrive, always. While the other employees were still in their cars or getting coffee, she had already cleaned the entrance hall, dusted the main living room furniture, and left the scent of lavender in the air. She knew exactly what her boss's favorite places were, and which ones he avoided. They never made eye contact. But she noticed, when he came down the stairs and the floor was clean, his face relaxed. When there was coffee ready, he took a sip and smiled sideways, and for her, that was enough. Grace didn't expect recognition, nor thanks. She came from a reality where compliments were rarer than money. and where surviving was more important than being seen. She had learned throughout life to be like the wind, present, necessary, but invisible. However, there was a detail that few noticed. She always finished everything before 7 a.m. This meant racing against the clock, washing bathrooms with torn gloves, going up and down stairs with heavy buckets. But that's what allowed her to leave before the others and return in time to take care of Evan before his crisis worsened. There were days when her son's strong coughs came to her mind like an internal alarm. At those times, she needed to disguise her desperation, maintain her composure, and pretend nothing was wrong. After all, personal problems are no excuse for absence, as she had once heard from the HR manager. Grace wrote down all expenses in a blue notebook, did extra cleaning at night when she could, and never let her son's medications run out, even if, for that, she had to go without lunch for days. Sometimes she took leftovers from the mansion's kitchen and told her son it was a gift from the boss. A lie, but a lie full of love. And behind all this effort was something even heavier. Guilt. Guilt for not having gotten adequate treatment when the first asthma attack appeared. Guilt for not being able to work during pregnancy. Guilt for being fired from an old job just for asking for medical leave for her son. Guilt for existing too much in a world that demands women like her to exist less. Even so, every day Grace arrived, cleaned, organized and left without making noise, like a light shadow, like an anonymous angel, and no one, absolutely no one, seemed to notice. Until that day when Nathan, her millionaire boss, woke up earlier than usual and saw her leaving through the back door in a hurry. For the first time he wondered, what is she hiding? And this thought would never leave him in peace. Nathan Reid always considered himself a fair man. He grew up in a comfortable house in Santa Monica, studied at good schools, had loving parents, and inherited solid values about respect and hard work. But he was also trained to win. And in the business world, that often meant ignoring what wasn't useful. And the invisibles, like Grace, rarely seemed useful. He was never cruel, just distracted. And in his high-performance logic, it worked like this. Whoever wants something, asks. Whoever deserves it stands out. Whoever needs it shouts. But Grace never shouted. She just did her job, always. Without error, without complaint. That's why when he saw her leave at 6:40 a.m. through the back door, without even looking around, something hit him. A strange sensation, as if he had missed an important detail for years. In the following days, Nathan began to observe her discreetly. He used the hallway mirror, reflections in the kitchen windows, the sound of the back door closing too early. Nothing escaped him anymore. And then came the small signs. The crushed children's lunchbox inside her backpack. The way she hid a little cough whenever she answered a phone call, calloused and red hands even on warm days, the tired but determined look. Nathan also began reviewing internal files. He asked, without saying why, for the HR history of the mansion's employees. And there he found something that made him uncomfortable. Grace had already refused 2 raises, not out of pride, but because, according to notes in the system, she had insisted that the money be redirected to other employees. This sounded nice on paper, but Nathan knew something was wrong. Why would someone give up a raise when earning minimum wage? He murmured. Even stranger was when he read that Grace had requested 3 times a definitive shift change, always to the earliest possible. The justifications were always vague, and even so, no one questioned. They just marked attended in the system. It was as if she were treated like a functional piece, without history, without face. Nathan felt for the first time in a long time a discomfort that didn't come from business or finance. It was something more human, an uneasiness that didn't fit in performance spreadsheets or company metrics. That's when he decided to call Paula, the cleaning supervisor. "What do you know about Grace?" "Ah, Grace. A blessing, sir. Doesn't talk much, but works like three people. Never absent, never complains, never late. We even joke that she has superpowers." "Does she have family?" "I think she has a son, but she never talks about him. I only saw a photo once when it fell from her purse. But she got all embarrassed and put it away quickly." Nathan thanked her and ended the conversation with a nod. But inside, something was churning. That night, he went home with a fixed thought. Who was Grace outside the walls of that house? It was a simple question, but one that would haunt him. And the next day, at 6:40 a.m. sharp, he did the unthinkable. He took his car, turned off his phone's tracker, and followed Grace through the streets of Los Angeles. There was no plan, just an impulse, a need to understand, to see with his own eyes what was hidden behind that silent woman he had ignored for so long. And what he was about to discover was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Nathan woke up before the alarm. He couldn't sleep properly since he decided he would follow Grace. It was a cloudy and cold morning, one of those when even cars take time to start. But he was up, already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed with his heart racing. It wasn't fear. It was restlessness. He grabbed the Tesla keys, put on a simple cap, wore a common jacket, nothing with brands or luxury, and left through the mansion's side garage in silence, as if he were now the invisible employee. He positioned the car at a safe distance, with headlights off, while observing the back door of the house. At 6:37 a.m., there she was. Grace appeared with the same firm and quick steps. Worn coat, backpack tight against her body. She didn't look around, didn't stop to breathe. It was as if she were fleeing from an invisible fire. Nathan followed her silently through the streets of Brentwood, then to the nearest bus station. It was a long walk, between hills and irregular sidewalks. He could barely believe she did this every day, and still arrived smiling at work. The bus arrived with the usual delay, old, noisy, crowded. Grace entered through the front door and huddled in a corner at the back, as if she wanted to disappear. Nathan didn't board the same bus. He chose to follow the vehicle carefully, maintaining distance. He knew that if he lost her now, he might never discover the truth. The trip lasted 48 minutes. The bus crossed entire neighborhoods, leaving behind the glow of Beverly Hills, the green of Hancock Park, the movement of Koreatown, until reaching Boyle Heights, one of the most forgotten regions of Los Angeles. There, the landscape was different. Broken roofs, graffitied walls, cracked sidewalks, patched-up poles. A parallel world within the same city where he lived, surrounded by symmetrical gardens and silent streets. Grace got off. Nathan parked the car at the corner and continued on foot. She walked for 5 more blocks until reaching her destination. An old trailer leaning against an abandoned lot. The place seemed improvised. The windows had plastic instead of glass. An improvised clothesline swayed in the wind with children's clothes. Nathan was paralyzed. "Is this where she lives?" he whispered with a dry throat. It wasn't just about poverty. It was about survival in its raw state. The kind of reality that doesn't appear in California's average income reports. The kind of pain that no one talks about. Grace knocked discreetly on the door next to it. An elderly woman opened it. The conversation was brief. The woman just nodded, and seconds later handed her a small backpack. Grace thanked her with a tight hug and entered the trailer. Nathan approached closer, hidden behind a car covered by tarp. He peeked through the partially open side window. Inside, he saw something he would never forget. Grace was kneeling beside a child, small, pale, using a nebulizer. The room was tiny. There was no bed, just mattresses on crates, broken toys, a small shelf with medicines. On top of the refrigerator, a picture frame with a photo of a man, perhaps the child's father. Nathan felt a lump in his throat. The child coughed with difficulty, and Grace, calm, told stories while running her hand through his hair. There was no fear in her eyes. There was love, a silent and indestructible love, a love that asked for nothing. It just continued. And in that moment, Nathan understood everything. Grace wasn't just dedicated, she was fighting every day against a system that ignores those who don't make noise, against lack, pain, hopelessness. He couldn't look away. There, in that cramped and cold room, Nathan saw more strength than he had ever seen in any boardroom, and right there he swore to himself that he would do something. But first, he needed to know everything. Nathan stood motionless, his eyes fixed on that scene so simple and at the same time devastating. Grace kneeling before her son, holding the inhaler mask with one hand and caressing his hair with the other. She spoke softly, murmuring sweet words, as if she were apologizing for having to leave again. The boy didn't cry. He just looked at his mother with a kind of tiredness that shouldn't exist in a child. His eyes seemed to understand more of the world than they should. And that, for Nathan, was the most painful part. He took a step back, swallowed hard, and for the first time in his life felt small. There he was, owner of a fortune that grew while he slept, standing before an improvised home where every inch was used with intelligence and urgency, a space where every penny made a difference, where even breathing was expensive. The trailer was cramped. There was a wire going through the window, probably pulling electricity from the house next door. A rope clothesline held socks and small clothes. A pot with rice and beans rested on an old chair. Outside, a children's backpack leaning against the door, already prepared for some emergency. Nathan sat on the curb across the street, far enough not to be seen, close enough to smell the scent of reheated food, and hear, even if distantly, Grace's voice trying to keep the boy awake. How did I never notice this? He thought. The feeling of guilt began to tighten in his chest. He remembered the times he had casually commented about buying $6,000 watches, the times he ordered coffees that cost more than Grace's daily salary. She listened, always listened, and never said anything. She just cleaned up his mess, washed his dishes, folded his clothes, and then ran to return in time to care for her sick son in a place that could barely be called home. Nathan took his phone from his pocket. He thought about photographing the scene, recording the impact so he would never forget. But he didn't have the courage. It would be invasive, disrespectful. The pain there was not to be displayed. It was to be felt, and mainly corrected. While he tried to process everything, he saw Grace get up, cover her son with blankets, and go out to talk to the lady from the house next door. She handed over a list of medicines and an envelope with some folded bills. "This is the last payment of the week, Donna Teresa. The hospital asked for new tests. You should have stopped paying me already, girl. I do this because I like you both. You already do too much. I can't be another burden." The two hugged. Then Grace took a deep breath, went back inside, looked once more at her son, now sleeping, and closed the door slowly, like someone who fears waking up pain. Nathan watched each gesture with teary eyes. The scene wasn't dramatic. It was real, simple, honest, and perhaps that's why it was so devastating. Back in the car, he didn't start the engine immediately. He leaned his head on the steering wheel, eyes closed, trying to contain something he rarely felt, a cry that came from within, slow, warm, uncontrollable. That wasn't Grace's fault. It was the world's fault, his, the structures that rewarded the noisy and forgot the discreet. Companies that claimed to value human capital, but didn't know the name of the woman who cleaned the bathroom every day. It was also the fault of poorly told meritocracy, the idea that whoever wants it gets it, when the truth is that many want, many fight, and simply don't have a chance. That morning, Nathan didn't go straight home. He drove aimlessly through the city. He passed through rich neighborhoods, saw children being dropped off at bilingual schools, people walking with expensive headphones, cafes selling cappuccinos with artisanal oat milk. All of that now seemed like a bubble. And on the other side of the city was Grace, with her sick son, in a borrowed trailer working for people who didn't even know her last name. Something inside him had changed, and Nathan Reid, the man who always had all the answers, finally understood that he needed to start asking questions. Grace never planned to live like this. In her youth, she had simple dreams: to be a nurse, marry someone kind, buy a little house with a porch. She never wanted luxury. She just wanted stability, peace, a place to raise her family without fear of lacking the essentials. But life, that cruel and unexpected sculptor, took her down tortuous paths. She was born in Sacramento, daughter of Filipino immigrants who came to the US seeking dignity. Her father, a gardener, her mother, an elderly caregiver. She grew up hearing that honest work is always rewarded, until she saw her parents lose everything when her father got sick, and medical costs swallowed the family's savings. At 17, Grace dropped out of school to work full-time and help support the house. She left her studies with tears in her eyes, promising herself that one day she would return. But reality doesn't usually give back what it takes so easily. At 22, she met Mark, a sweet and educated young man who worked in a shop near where she did cleaning. They fell in love quickly. It seemed like a new beginning. They married at the civil registry, and a year later she became pregnant with Evan. It was the most beautiful phase of her life, until fate broke everything once again. When Evan was only 2 years old, Mark suffered a car accident returning from an extra delivery. He was hospitalized for weeks, but didn't resist. Grace became a widow at 25, with a small son, no insurance, no diploma, no support network. Then began a silent journey of sacrifices. She worked 2 jobs, slept 3 hours a night, avoided talking about pain. The goal was clear: keep Evan alive and with dignity. When he was diagnosed with severe asthma, the guilt weighed even more. She thought that maybe, if she had had money, she could have done more tests, bought a better crib, offered a house without mold on the walls. But there was no time for regrets. She learned to negotiate expired medications with community pharmacies, to cut her own hair and her son's, to make do with rice, eggs, and faith, to kneel every night and give thanks anyway, because her son was still breathing, even if with difficulty. Over time, Grace became an expert at disappearing. She understood that to survive, she needed to be useful, silent, efficient. Any complaint, any request for time off, any breath could cost her job. That's how she arrived at Nathan's mansion. The position appeared on a rainy morning through a recommendation from a friend who worked with an outsourced company. They paid minimum wage, but the environment was clean, schedules were stable, and there was a chance to get an early shift. It was everything she needed. In the selection process, she didn't mention her son, only her experience. She didn't cry, didn't ask. She just said, "I arrive early, work hard, and don't cause problems." And she kept every word. During the first 2 years, no one ever asked about her life outside of there, not even her co-workers. She was cordial, but not intimate. She laughed when others laughed, but never talked much, never left clues. Even the letters she tried to send to HR, asking for fixed schedules, explaining that she couldn't stay late, or requesting help with health insurance, were written with fear, as if she were begging for something she didn't have the right to ask for. None were answered. She continued, always. And as paradoxical as it was, Grace found comfort in the mansion's routine. The clean rooms, the perfumed bathrooms, the sparkling windows, all of this gave her a false sense of control, order in chaos, temporary relief from the mess of her own life. But every end of shift was also a restart of the real battle. Running to the bus, picking up Evan, giving dinner, taking care of medication, preparing the next day's lunch, doing extra cleaning when she could, and hoping that no crisis would take him back to the hospital. Even so, she smiled at her son. Always smiled. Because deep down, Grace believed that even with everything against her, the love she felt was enough to keep them both standing. She just had no idea that at that exact moment outside her window, there was someone observing all that hidden life, with a completely broken heart. Chapter 6. The Child. In the back room. The sun began to tear through the grey sky of Boyle Heights when Nathan found himself still standing there in the shadow of an abandoned car without the courage to leave. He couldn't say exactly what kept him in that place. Perhaps it was the silence full of meaning that echoed from inside the trailer. Or perhaps it was the boy's face, so fragile and so familiar, as if he knew him from somewhere. But he didn't know him. He was just a rich stranger observing the intimate struggle of a woman who, for years, he hadn't even noticed. Through the poorly sealed window, Nathan could see when Grace took a damp towel and carefully cleaned her son's forehead. Her gestures were precise, delicate, like those of a nurse, or of a mother who learned to do everything alone, the hard way, afraid of making mistakes and losing what she loved most. The boy, still with the inhaler mask on his face, tried to say something between muffled coughs. Nathan couldn't hear but could see the expression. He smiled. He smiled at his mother. With half-open eyes, fighting against tiredness, he smiled. And that's when Nathan broke down. He didn't cry silently like before. He cried with his whole body, trembling hands, quivering chin, shoulders curved like someone carrying guilt. That boy, in that improvised bed, surrounded by cheap medicines and hope, had destroyed any shield he still had. How was such a smile possible? How could someone with so little still offer so much? Nathan remembered complaining the previous week because the delivery coconut water was warm. He remembered dismissing an entire lunch because the sauce was too salty. He remembered buying a new $1,000 headphone simply because the previous one didn't fit well. He wanted to go in. He wanted to say he was there, that he knew now, that he would do something. But there was something sacred in that space, something that stopped him. That scene wasn't for him. It was for the two of them, mother and son. And any interruption would break that. So he just watched a little more. He saw when Grace changed the boy's clothes delicately. The clothes were worn, but clean. He wore a Superman logo shirt, faded, but still full of color in his eyes. Then she sat on the floor, pulled a plastic box, and took out a small children's book. The Boy Who Fixed Hearts. Nathan read the title through the window and felt a strange tightness. She read slowly with a soft voice, as if that story were a bridge between the two, a way of saying that even tired, even exhausted, there was still time to dream with her son. Suddenly the boy interrupted her. Nathan didn't hear the exact words, but saw the lips move. Grace's gaze get lost for a second, her eyes water. She responded with a contained smile and kissed his forehead. At that moment, Nathan imagined what the child had asked. Maybe, "Why do we live here, Mommy?" Or, "Will you still take me to that beautiful park?" Or worse, "Are you leaving again today?" Nathan didn't know, but he knew it hurt. He knew that no child should carry the fear of losing the little they have, that no mother should have to choose between working or caring for her sick son, and that he, with all his money, influence and power, could no longer pretend he didn't see. He stayed there until Grace left the room, until he saw the boy fall asleep with a slight smile on his face. Then he walked slowly to his car, looked once more at the trailer and thought, if that boy grows up, it will be because of her, only because of her. That night, Nathan didn't sleep. He opened his computer, typed chronic childhood asthma without health insurance on Google, read medical articles, mothers' forums, parents' testimonies. He discovered that Grace probably spent more than she earned just to keep her son out of the hospital. He discovered that a single hospitalization could cost twice her salary, and he discovered, above all, that thousands of women lived like her. Between the invisible and the unbearable, he felt he needed to do something, not out of pity, but for justice. And from that day on, he would never be the same man. Nathan returned to the mansion the next morning with a different purpose. It wasn't guilt that moved him, it was conscience, and it weighed more than any financial debt. As soon as he entered his office, he typed a password that not even his directors knew. There was an exclusive file where all internal documentation of house and company employees was stored, from admission history to archived correspondence. He typed the name Grace Villanueva. The system returned little data, a clean record, nothing but praise, no complaints. Punctuality bordered on the impossible, but what caught his attention was a folder called HR Requests, Confidential. Nathan clicked, and there he found the letters. There weren't many, just 3, but each one seemed to weigh tons. They were like silent screams, written by hand, with firm letters, but trembling at the curves, as if each line were a request made with fear. The first, dated 2 years ago, asked for a definitive change to the morning shift. She said she had an unavoidable daily personal commitment without detailing what it was. At the end of the letter, she apologized for insisting. The second, months later, explained that for medical reasons, she needed to leave before 8 a.m. on some days, and offered to compensate with extra tasks on the following days. The third was the hardest to read. It began by saying, "I know it's not my place to ask, but I'm not writing for myself, but for my son. Evan has severe asthma and is under medical observation. I'm trying to save money for tests that the hospital doesn't cover. Any possibility of an advance or inclusion in a health plan would mean the world to me. I understand if it's not possible." There was no digital signature, no received stamp. The system just marked it as not responded. Nathan closed his eyes, feeling his stomach churn. That wasn't just neglect. It was a faithful portrait of how the system treats those who remain silent, how a woman who only asks with dignity can be ignored for not making enough noise. He thought about the corporate phrases that adorn the company's frames. Our strength comes from people. We value human talents. Excellence begins with empathy. Pure hypocrisy. Grace had followed all the invisible rules of the good employee. Never arrived late, never asked for unjustified time off, never used her son as an excuse. And even so, she was ignored as if she were just another replaceable piece. And he, Nathan, even unintentionally, was complicit in that. He got up from his chair with an impulse that startled the secretary nearby. "Bring me all of Grace's physical files. Now, and everything from HR about employee requests in the last 3 years. But sir, this could take time." "Then start now." While he waited, Nathan returned to his computer and opened the Human Resources Department email. He did an internal search for Grace Villanueva. Nothing. Not one response. No contact. The feeling was of being before a ghost, someone who existed only to serve, but who was never recognized as a life. That afternoon, he went down to the kitchen, where Grace usually started her shift. It was empty. It was her day off. But on the counter, there was something that made him stop. A blue notebook, small with a worn cover, forgotten there by chance. Nathan hesitated but opened it. On the first pages, notes of daily tasks, lists of cleaning products, schedules, behavior patterns. Mr. Reid likes coffee without sugar. Check if room 3 has extra toilet paper. But on the middle pages came accounts, handmade spreadsheets. Evan's medicine, $74. Milk inhaler, $26. Bus, 2:10. Extra cleaning Saturday, $40. Leftover, $3.87. And on an almost erased page, a note written to herself, "If I can keep everything under control until the end of the month, I can buy Evan's books. He said he wants to learn to read stories to me." Nathan took a deep breath, but the air didn't enter. He closed the notebook like someone closing a wound. At that moment, he understood that Grace never wanted charity. She wanted opportunity, respect, a little dignity, the chance to live without having to hide her pain to keep her job. And the cruelest thing of all is that she never asked for too much, just the basics. Nathan sat down in silence on the same counter where so many coffees were drunk without him knowing who prepared them. Now he knew, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would be the same. The next morning, Grace arrived at the mansion as always, before sunrise, before anyone noticed. Her face maintained the same serene air as every day, but inside something hurt. Evan had had a difficult night. He coughed so much that he ended up vomiting his dinner. He didn't sleep well. She spent the entire night between damp cloths, back massages, and silent prayers for the crisis to pass without having to run to the emergency room. She couldn't miss work again. She had already lost last Sunday's extra cleaning because of his fever, and that meant $20 less. She was exhausted, but even so, she cleaned the stair railing carefully, as she did every day. She knew Mr. Reid liked to touch it while going down for coffee. Details mattered, even when no one said anything. While folding towels in the second-floor closet, she heard footsteps approaching. It was Paula, the supervisor. "Grace, come with me to the office, please." She froze. Those words always came with dismissals, warnings, or unexpected changes. Something inside her was already prepared for the worst. She fixed her bun, smoothed her apron, and followed in silence. She entered the room, where Paula and an HR employee she had never seen before were waiting. "Grace, good morning. We received your old requests and thought it was important to talk." She nodded, but her mind accelerated. Now, after 2 years? Her heart raced. She tried to maintain a calm look, but her fingers trembled discreetly on her lap. "Unfortunately, your letters weren't properly filed. It seems there was an archiving error, but we want to hear you. Can you better explain what you asked for?" Grace swallowed hard. She tried to maintain composure. "It was just about my schedule. I needed to leave earlier to take care of my son. He has a respiratory condition, and I also asked if there was any way to join a health plan." "We understand, but you know that to have access to the plan, you need to be registered as a headquarters employee, not a house employee." She nodded again. She already knew the answer. She had understood years ago that her position was too fragile for rights. "You mentioned your son. Is he still sick?" "Yes, ma'am. He got better, but needs constant monitoring. Sometimes he has crises at night." There was an uncomfortable silence in the room. The HR employee opened a notebook and typed something. Paula cleared her throat like someone who wanted to end it. "Grace, we thank you for staying calm and for everything you do here. We really admire your dedication." "We admire your dedication." The phrase echoed in her head like a polite slap. She just smiled, because she knew that, in practice, that meant continue being useful, continue being invisible. She got up, thanked them, and left the room with firm steps. But in the hallway, her eyes watered. The pain didn't come from the answer. It came from the way, from the coldness, from the way humiliation was served to her with kindness. It was like being swallowed by a calm sea. In the pantry, she sat alone, ate a piece of bread with margarine, and wrote something in her blue notebook. No point in asking, can only continue. Grace had learned to live with silence as armor. She knew she wasn't well regarded if she talked too much, asked too much, cried too much. She knew the world was cruel to those who exposed fragility. She was good, hard-working, polite, And still, she was treated like a cheap piece, because she was a woman, because she was a single mother, because she was poor. And the saddest thing was knowing that even with all that, she was lucky compared to so many others. Meanwhile, Nathan observed everything from afar. He didn't want to interfere at that moment. He needed to see with his own eyes how the system he himself had helped build treated someone like her. And what he saw deeply shamed him. The coldness, the lack of listening, the corporate posture of those who pretend to welcome, but just wait for the issue to die. That day, seeing her sitting in the pantry alone, eating bread with margarine while typing on her phone, probably asking the neighbor if Evan was okay, Nathan decided he wouldn't wait anymore. He wouldn't let Grace write any more letters that wouldn't be read, because now he was ready to read and to act. That same night, Nathan didn't go home. He stayed at the company office until almost midnight, hunched over Grace's blue notebook, now carefully scanned page by page. Beside it, the unanswered letters, the manual spreadsheets, photos of the trailer he took with his phone without her noticing. Not to expose, but to remember, to never forget again. But he knew. Helping someone like Grace couldn't seem like charity. She was proud, dignified. She didn't accept favors, only real opportunities. And that's how the plan was born. Nathan didn't want to just help Grace. He wanted to honor her story, correct the injustice, and if possible, ensure that no other woman like her would go through that in silence. He started with something simple, a conversation with the cleaning supervisor. "Paula, I need you to indicate the 5 oldest and most committed house employees to me." "Of course, sir. Grace is certainly among them." "I know. And I need you to organize an extraordinary evaluation for her, but discreet, without warning her. After that, I need a technical report recommending her immediate promotion to supervisor. But she works part-time. That changes starting now. She'll be made permanent, with complete health insurance, no deductions." Paula widened her eyes, but didn't question. There was something in Nathan's tone that left no room for bureaucracy. Next, he called the director of a private children's clinic in Pasadena, specialized in respiratory diseases. "Dr. Jacobs, I need an urgent consultation." "It's for an employee's son. No, she can't pay, but I'll pay. Private, absolute confidentiality." "Of course, Mr. Reid. Whenever you want." After that, he contacted the administration of the property where Grace lived. He discovered that the land where the trailer was parked had been confiscated due to the owner's debts. Nathan bought it the same day, but he didn't want to simply take Grace out of there without permission. He wanted to restore dignity. So he called a social construction company, one of those that build modest but safe houses, quickly. "I want you to build a micro house on the land. 2 bedrooms, kitchen with gas, heating, clean air, adequate ventilation, and fast. I want it ready in 2 weeks, cash payment, and no one needs to know it was me." The silence on the other end lasted a few seconds. Then the answer came firmly. "We'll start tomorrow." And they started. The next morning, Nathan pretended to go on a business trip. He asked the team for leave and embarked on something much more important, the silent execution of a justice plan. He visited the community school in Boyle Heights and paid advanced tuition for Evan in a special literacy program. He also donated $50,000 to the neighborhood single mothers support center in the name of a community friend. Behind the scenes, Grace was being promoted discreetly. Her new position was still operational, but with flexible hours, double salary, and all labor rights guaranteed. More than that, now she would have health insurance that covered first-class hospitals. Evan would be treated with dignity for the first time. But Nathan still wasn't satisfied. He created an internal fund called Project GV, with her name disguised in the initials, destined to map stories like hers among the company's collaborators. And discreetly, he wrote a letter, by hand. Not to Grace, to himself, a commitment letter, a personal oath. I promise never again to pretend I don't see. I promise to use my position to give voice to those who live in silence. I promise that no Grace will pass invisible before me anymore. He signed, put it in an envelope, kept it in his desk drawer, and took a deep breath. At that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. It wasn't charity, it was justice, and it was just the beginning. The following week, everything seemed normal. Grace arrived early, as always. She mopped the kitchen tiles, checked the bathrooms, organized the towels. But there was a strange atmosphere in the air, as if the mansion's corridors were whispering something she didn't know yet. At noon, Paula appeared with a slight smile. "Grace, Mr. Reid asked for you to go up to his office." She froze. Whenever she was called to the office, she feared the worst. She checked her apron, smoothed her bun, and went upstairs with light steps, her heart beating fast. Nathan was standing by the window, looking at the garden. When she entered, he turned slowly and, with a gentle gesture, pointed to the armchair in front of the desk. "Sit down, Grace, please." She hesitated but obeyed. "I want to start by apologizing, really, not just as a boss, but as a human being." Grace widened her eyes. She didn't understand. Nathan continued, "For years you've been coming here every day, giving your best, and no one ever stopped to listen to you, to ask if everything was okay. I never asked, and that shames me." She remained silent. The lump in her throat grew, but she couldn't swallow it. I know where you live, Grace. I saw your son. I saw your struggle. And I realized we failed you. Not just as a company, but as society." Tears began to fall. She tried to get up, but he made a gentle gesture with his hand. "Please. Wait, don't worry. You didn't do anything wrong. On the contrary." Nathan approached with an envelope. He handed it to her. "This is your new contract. Permanent position, health insurance, flexible hours. You're now a team supervisor, with all rights." Grace opened it slowly. She read the first lines and put her hand to her mouth. Tears now fell freely. "But I didn't ask for anything. I know. And that's exactly why you deserve all of this." He knelt in front of her with teary eyes. "And there's more." He opened a drawer and took out a key with a simple keychain. "This is the key to your new house, on the same land, but with real walls, with heating, with windows that close, 2 bedrooms, kitchen, space for Evan to play, and clean air." Grace couldn't speak. She just cried. Her shoulders trembled, her hands clutched the envelope like someone holding a piece of life. "The land is now yours. In your name, no debt, no rent." She shook her head, denying, not believing. Why are you doing this for me?" Nathan smiled tenderly. "Because you've already done more for me than I can explain. Because you taught me that there's more nobility in the silence of a tired mother than in all the boardrooms I've ever attended." He stood up, walked around the desk and extended his hand. "Can I give you a hug?" She hesitated, but stood up, and the two hugged, in a simple, human way. No boss, no employee, just 2 hearts trying to heal. That afternoon, Nathan personally took her to her new home. The trailer was still there, but next to it, a small new house, with light paint, flowers planted at the entrance, and a sign on the door. "Welcome, Grace and Evan." Donna Teresa was waiting for them at the gate with a smile that said everything. When Evan came running out of the trailer and saw the house, his eyes filled with light. Even with his fragile body, he ran inside, touching each wall as if touching a castle. "Is this where we're going to live, Mommy? For real?" Grace knelt, hugged her son and said, "Yes, my love. Now it's for real." Across the street, Nathan watched in silence. And at that moment, he knew something inside him had changed forever. 2 weeks later, Nathan called a general meeting at the mansion. All employees were called, from cleaning to security, from kitchen to administration. It was rare. It almost never happened. The main hall was prepared with aligned chairs, a coffee and juice table at the back, and a screen turned on, but with nothing projected yet. The employees whispered, suspicious. No one knew exactly why. Grace was also called. She arrived nervous, thinking there was some error, some mistake. She sat in the back rows discreetly, as she always did. Nathan entered in silence. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a blue shirt and simple pants. His expression was serious. But there was something different in his eyes. He was a man who had awakened from a long sleep. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here." The hall fell silent. "Today, I'm not going to talk about goals, nor about productivity. I want to talk about something more important, about dignity, about respect." He walked slowly between the chairs. "For a long time, I lived inside a bubble. I believed I was being fair, that my company valued people. But recently, I discovered that we can be very wrong, even thinking we're doing right." Everyone listened in absolute silence. "I want to tell the story of a person who has worked with us for years, someone who went unnoticed for too long." Grace lowered her eyes, almost shrank in her chair. She felt her heart race. Nathan continued, "This person arrives before everyone, works in silence, never complains, never asks for anything. But even so, is one of the strongest I've ever known." He paused, looked at her. "I'm talking about Grace Villanueva." Everyone turned around. Grace, red-faced, tried to smile, but tears were already falling. Nathan continued with a firm voice. "Grace isn't just an employee. She's a warrior, a single mother who faces a daily battle to care for her sick son, who lived for years in a trailer, who was ignored by our structures, and who, even so, never stopped giving her best." Silence. A silence that said more than words. She sent letters that were never answered, asked for help with respect, with kindness, and we ignored. I ignored. And that's why I'm here, to apologize, publicly, because there's no honor in pretending nothing happened. Paula, the supervisor, was wiping her eyes discreetly. Some employees lowered their heads. Others looked at Grace with a mixture of respect and guilt. Nathan raised his voice. "But I'm not here just to apologize. I'm here to change." He pointed to the screen. Images appeared. The new house, Evan's room, the clinic where he now received treatment. Simple photos, true. No filter, no marketing. This is Grace's house now, and this is Evan, her son. He's well, because she had courage, because she resisted, because she's bigger than any career plan. Everyone applauded, standing, long, intense, breathtaking. Grace cried, but this time it was a light cry, relief, recognition, healing. Nathan concluded, "From today on, no employee in this house will be invisible. No story will be ignored. We're creating a new direct channel between each collaborator and the board. No intermediaries. And we'll review all cases similar to Grace's, because we can no longer allow the best among us to be treated like shadows." He walked to Grace and said, "You're not an exception. You're an example." Applause again. And this time, Grace smiled. A shy but firm smile. A smile from someone who knows that for the first time in a long time, someone finally saw her truly. Grace returned home that day with her eyes still teary, heart racing, and head full of voices, applause, looks. It was strange to be seen. After so many years living on the margins, that recognition seemed surreal, like a dream you fear to wake up from. But it wasn't a dream. It was reality. And Evan, as always, was the first to notice. "Mommy, you're different. You're light." She smiled, holding his face between her hands. "I think it's because for the first time, Mommy is breathing without fear." That night, they had dinner with rice, beans, and roast chicken. With new silverware, at a real table, sitting side by side, with the warm light of the newly built house illuminating not just the environment, but everything around. It was the kind of dinner that's common for many, but for Grace and Evan, it was a banquet. And for the first time, she could tell her son a victory story without hiding her tears. She told him she had been promoted, that they now had health insurance, that he would have new books and a teacher just for him. And at the end, Evan, with shining eyes, said, "I knew you were a superhero, Mommy." Grace didn't respond. She just hugged him tightly, feeling that every word from that boy was a final seal on a phase of life that was finally ending, the phase of fear, of shame, of silence. Days later, she began training new employees as a supervisor. She didn't change her posture. She remained simple, kind, but now with a firmness in her eyes she had never had before. Colleagues began to approach more, wanting to hear her story, learn from her. And Grace learned to tell it without shrinking, without apologizing for existing. She had become not just an example of overcoming, but a symbol of dignity, of how sometimes the greatest strength is in continuing, in getting up every day, even without hope, in loving so much that love becomes resistance. Nathan continued to follow everything closely, but he never wanted the spotlight. He avoided mentioning what he had done. He just said, "I just gave back what the world owed her." Evan began attending the Pasadena clinic. He had access to cutting-edge medications. Soon the crises began to diminish. Little by little, the boy gained color, strength, smile. He began to draw, and the first sketches showed the new house, his mother smiling, himself with a superhero cape. But what surprised Nathan most was the gift he received from him months later. It was a simple envelope. Inside, a child's drawing. Evan had drawn Nathan with wings. Next to it, he wrote in his crooked handwriting, "You are my mommy's angel." Nathan held the paper for long minutes, alone, in silence. Because in that childish stroke there was more meaning than in all the reports he had ever read in his life. Grace never asked for anything, never demanded, never shouted, never used her pain as blackmail. And even so, she received everything. Because the world, when it looks with justice, understands that there are people who have already paid too dearly just for existing, and those people, silent, humble, resilient, are the ones who most deserve to be seen. Months passed. The routine at the mansion continued, but nothing was the same. The atmosphere had changed. The corridors seemed more human, the faces more attentive, the hands lighter. Grace's presence was now felt, not as an efficient shadow, but as a presence of value. Nathan had also changed. He remained a business owner, millionaire, public figure, but something in his eyes had softened. His speeches now brought real names, backstage stories. Instead of talking about innovation, he began talking about recognition. Instead of using the word profit, he began using legacy. And it all started with a woman whose full name he didn't even know for a long time. Grace. He saw her pass through the corridors, now with firm posture and serene steps. And he knew that woman had taught him more than any MBA or international conference. With silence, with pain, with love that insisted on existing, even when the world seemed to want to erase it. Evan was growing fast. He already read small sentences, traded stickers with doctors' children at the clinic. One day, on a surprise visit, Nathan saw him running in the backyard of the new house with a car made from a plastic bottle. His eyes had the joy of someone who could finally be a child. And that was it. That was the greatest miracle of all. Childhood restored. Nathan thought a lot about that. About how the world had convinced him for so long that being a millionaire meant having accumulated figures, diversified investments, awards on the shelf. But now, he knew, being truly rich was knowing how to look. It was recognizing the value of the invisible. It was having the courage to interrupt one's own comfort to see another's pain. It was using what you have to give back what was missing, without an audience, without applause. That day, closing the gate of Grace's newly painted house with the evening light bathing the walls, Nathan smiled to himself, because he understood. He understood that the world didn't need more millionaires. It needed more men who had the courage to feel. And it was on that day he discovered that sometimes true millionaires don't have bank accounts. They have purpose, they have courage, they have heart.